They expelled his son at 10:17 a.m. The letter was short, cold, typed in Standard Times New Roman font, as if the weight of legacy and blood could be reduced to 12 bland lines and a digital signature. Due to disruptive behavior and ideological conflict with the values of this institution, we are forced to expel your son, Isaiah Caboret Traoré, effective immediately. No phone call, no conversation. Just a folded paper placed into the trembling hands of a boy whose only crime was asking the wrong question during a history lesson. If France funded the Civil War, why is their flag still hanging in our auditorium? The teacher hadn't answered. The room had gone silent. And the silence, as always, was more dangerous than any answer could have been. Now the boy sat on the front steps of the Lycée National de la Nouvelle République, uniform wrinkled, bag half open, a single pencil snapped in his hand like the spine of truth under pressure. The guards didn't look at him. The teachers avoided his eyes. No one offered him water. No one dared, because he wasn't just a child. He was his father's child. And in this country, that made him dangerous. That made him unforgettable. Ibrahim Traoré was mid-meeting when they told him. A general from the border had just finished detailing the 4th convoy attack in 2 weeks when a security aide stepped in, pale and shaking. "It's Isaiah," he said. That was all. That was enough. The room fell silent. Traoré stood, removed the pen from his hand, and placed it gently on the table like one might place a knife before choosing not to stab. No rage. No drama. Just stillness. But everyone in the room, every general, every minister, every translator felt the tremor ripple through the floor like something ancient had just stirred. He didn't take the motorcade, didn't call for sirens. He walked. 16 blocks through dust and horn and chaos. The people parted before him like breath before a prayer. Some tried to follow. Most didn't. They knew better. When he reached the school, his son was still sitting there, head down, fingers digging into the brick step like he could anchor himself against the humiliation. Traoré stopped in front of him, said nothing. Isaiah didn't look up. "They said I embarrassed the Republic," the boy whispered. Traoré nodded once. "Good." The headmaster came out minutes later, flanked by 2 deputy directors and a woman from the Education Ministry whose smile was trained in European universities. "President Traoré, we regret the situation, but—" "You expelled a boy," he interrupted, "for quoting truth." "He questioned the narrative," she replied. "He questioned the colonizers," he corrected. The woman stiffened. "We have donors, expectations. The school must maintain—" "Silence?" he asked. "Obedience?" Her lips pressed into a line. "Dignity." "No," he said calmly. "You maintain their story." Then he turned slowly and scanned the campus. The rows of polished classrooms, the marble busts of foreign philosophers, the tall, proud flagpoles holding borrowed colors. "Level it," he said. The woman blinked. I beg your pardon?" "Level it," he repeated. "This school, this lie, tear it down." She laughed nervously. "That's not within your—" "I am the Republic," he said. "And the Republic does not educate its children in cages built by thieves." The bulldozers arrived by evening. Not with rage, with precision. He watched from across the street, his arm around Isaiah's shoulder, as the marble cracked and the windows shattered. The busts were wrapped in cloth and buried. The books were collected, examined. The auditorium where the flag hung gone in minutes. Some called it madness. Others called it vengeance. But the people knew better. They came by the hundreds, then thousands, watching, filming, singing. When the walls collapsed, a cheer rose not of violence, but release. The cheer of a nation watching the lie burn. A small girl stood beside her mother and whispered, "Will there be another school?" Traoré heard her, turned. Kneeling, he said, "Yes, one made of truth." That night, he sat with Isaiah in the dust where the building once stood. They roasted corn over a fire made from the broken desks. "You're not angry?" Isaiah asked. "No," he replied. "I'm proud." "I got kicked out of school." "No," he said, eyes glinting in the firelight. "You kicked them out of history." And somewhere in the wind, a page turned. They said the dust would choke the city, but it didn't. It rose in columns, yes, swirled like ghosts of former lessons and the brittle pride of fallen headmasters, but it didn't choke. It revealed. And as the sun cut through the settling air like a blade through fabric, the people saw what had been hidden beneath those walls all along a place built not for children, but for silence. A space dressed as progress, but forged in fear. The next morning, Traoré returned to the site alone, no security, no aides, just him and the wind, and a folded note in his pocket written in the clumsy but defiant handwriting of his son. "If they won't teach us truth, maybe we're meant to grow it ourselves." He stood there, staring at the crater where the school once stood, and in the stillness, he could almost hear the echo of old bells ringing lessons that never belonged to their soil. That day he made no speech. He simply bent down, scooped a handful of dust into his palm, and whispered to it as if it were a seed. That evening, without announcement, the bulldozers came again, but this time they carried shovels and seedlings, not weapons. Men and women arrived with sacks of rice, stacks of books, fragments of chalk and faith. Children came barefoot, giggling, balancing wooden planks on their shoulders like future columns. Nobody asked for permission. Nobody waited for a blueprint. They just began. Word spread faster than fire. That the president's son had been expelled not for violence, not for cheating, but for asking why the truth was missing. That the president had responded not with vengeance, but with demolition. That something new was rising from the ashes, not a monument, but a movement. And by the third sunrise, the ruins had become sacred ground. Isaiah returned, too, quietly, no longer ashamed. He carried a small potted baobab, not more than a sprout, and planted it at the center of the rubble. "This," he said aloud to no one in particular, "will grow as we grow. And if they try to tear it down, we'll plant 1,000 more." That sentence made it into the newspapers, not as a headline, but as a prophecy. Officials called it unhinged. Academics called it unaccredited. Foreign powers called it dangerous. But the people called it school. In the weeks that followed, no formal curriculum was printed, yet more children learned there than in any marble hall in the capital. They learned how to speak without apology, how to trace the roots of their identity without flinching. They read from books banned in the West and sang lullabies composed before colonial borders stole their cadence. And always, at the edge of the gathering, stood Traoré, watching, listening, his face unreadable but his posture soft, like a soldier who had finally put down his weapon and picked up wonder. International media descended soon after. They came in pressed suits and soft shoes, armed with cameras and assumptions. One asked him, "President, do you not fear this will erode the credibility of your national education system?" He answered slowly, "There was no credibility to erode, only repetition." Another asked, "How do you plan to measure the success of this experiment?" And he said, "By how many children walk home unashamed of their name." Meanwhile, across the continent, Other leaders watched in silence. Some scoffed. Some planned their next bribe to foreign boards. But a few, just a few, sent envoys, not with threats, but with requests. One note arrived from an island nation simply saying, "Teach us how to tear down lies." By the end of the second month, the school had no walls but many rooms. There were classrooms beneath trees, libraries made from crates, lecture halls that echoed with birdsong. A blind woman taught poetry from memory. A former prisoner led debates on justice. And Isaiah, the expelled boy, now stood daily before a sea of faces, asking questions the old schools had punished them for even imagining. But the story didn't end there, because a storm was brewing, not in the sky, in the chambers of power. One minister, embarrassed and enraged, drafted a law, a quiet one, hidden in pages of educational reform. It would make unauthorized teaching punishable by imprisonment. For the safety of the children, the draft read. Traoré received a copy late one night. He stared at it under a dim yellow bulb, his fingers trembling not with fear, but something deeper, betrayal. He had appointed that minister himself, had trusted him, had dined with his children, and now this, an attempt to criminalize the very freedom his son had reclaimed. He burned the draft page by page, not out of anger, out of clarity. The next day he appeared before the National Assembly without notice. Cameras scrambled, reporters breathless, ministers nervous. He carried no speech, just the same chalk Isaiah had used to write that first question. He walked to the central lectern, turned, and without raising his voice, said, "If a nation fears its children's questions more than its enemies, it has already surrendered." Silence. Then murmurs. Then one minister stood, then another. And slowly, impossibly, the room filled not with applause but with standing stillness. A collective reckoning. A revolution with no gunfire, only chalk dust. Later that week, the law was buried. Quietly. Permanently. That night Isaiah asked him, "Did you know it would work?" Traoré replied, "No, but I knew I had to try, because if you hadn't asked your question, I would still be asleep in a palace pretending to be awake." On the anniversary of the school's destruction, a statue was erected not of Traoré, not of Isaiah, but of a faceless child holding a book in one hand and a brick in the other. Its plaque read simply, "Build and question." And each year, children came to touch its feet, not for luck, but for courage. Decades later, when Traoré was no longer president, no longer feared or praised, just an old man walking with a cane carved from that first baobab tree, he returned to the campus, now a living forest of knowledge. A little girl ran up to him. She couldn't have been more than 6. She looked up and asked, "Did you really destroy a school just because they were mean to your son?" He chuckled. "No," he said. "I destroyed a lie because my son reminded me how truth feels." She nodded solemnly. "Good, because I have a lot of questions." "Then ask them," he said, loudly. She ran off, laughing, and he stood beneath the tree, hand on its trunk, eyes misty. The wind shifted, the leaves whispered, and somewhere in that rustle he heard Isaiah's voice, still young, still bold, still unafraid. "If they won't teach us truth, maybe we're meant to grow it ourselves."